Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi. Salam sejahtera, shalom, om swastiastu, namo buddhaya, salam kebajikan. Perkenalkan, nama saya Ariza Natania, selaku Energy Research Assistant dari World Resources Institute Indonesia, CIA Indonesia, yang akan memandu acara pada pagi hari ini. Pagi ini secara khusus saya ingin menyapa tamu undangan pada hari ini, yang terhormat Kepala Dinas Penanaman Modal dan Pelayanan Terpadu Satu Pintu DPMPTSP Provinsi Jawa Barat, Kepala Bapeda Provinsi Jawa Barat, Kepala Dinas Perindustrian dan Perdagangan Provinsi Jawa Barat, Tim Akselerasi Pembangunan atau TAP Provinsi Jawa Barat, Kepala Dinas Energi Sumber Daya Mineral, General Manager Unit Induk PLN Wilayah Jawa Barat, Kepala Perwakilan Bank Indonesia Jawa Barat, dan peserta sekalian. Selamat pagi. Terima kasih atas kehadiran Bapak dan Ibu sekalian pada hari terakhir dari Capacity Building Series Managing Industrial Estates Decarbonization Effort Towards Net Zero yang diselenggarakan oleh Clean Energy Investment Accelerator berkolaborasi dengan Dinas Penanaman Modal dan Pelayanan Terpadu Satu Pintu Provinsi Jawa Barat. Sebelum memulai, saya akan membacakan panduan untuk mengikuti training. Yang pertama, dimohon Bapak dan Ibu sekalian dapat menamakan ulang atau rename nama Anda di Zoom dengan format nama strip institusi. Yang kedua, jika Anda ingin mengajukan pertanyaan saat speaker sedang berbicara, bisa dengan menuliskan pertanyaan di kolom chat. Dan yang terakhir, jika Anda ingin menanyakan pertanyaan secara langsung pada saat sesi tanya-jawab, bisa dengan menggunakan fitur raise hand. Kemudian moderator akan mengundang Bapak atau Ibu untuk berbicara. Dimohon juga untuk para peserta dapat mengisi formulir kuesioner dari CIA pada link yang dibagikan di kolom chat. Kuesioner tersebut sebagai masukan untuk CIA dapat memberikan pembangunan kapasitas dan asistensi yang lebih baik lagi untuk kawasan industri. Pada hari ketiga, hari terakhir, Kemarin kita sudah membahas topik yang berjudul Government Support to Promote REUs and Energy Efficiency in Industrial Estates, di mana dibahas mengenai berbagai regulasi dan insentif seputar energi konservasi dan renewable energy certificate dari PLN sebagai salah satu opsi atribut energi yang dapat digunakan oleh kawasan industri. Pada hari ini, yaitu hari terakhir dari Capacity Building Series CIA dan DPMPTSP, kita akan melanjutkan sesi training kita dengan topik berjudul Introduction of Science-Based Target Initiative and the Practice of Decarbonizing Industrial Estates in Other Countries. Pada hari ini juga kita telah kedatangan 3 pembicara, yaitu Daniel Riley sebagai Director of International Corporate Climate Partnership dari World Wide Fund, Renewable Thermal Collaborative, ada Mas Nanda Nur sebagai Sustainable Landscape dan Business Senior Project Lead dari World Resources Institute Indonesia, dan yang terakhir ada Hang Dao sebagai Co-Lead dari Clean Energy Investment Accelerator Vietnam. Tanpa berlama-lama lagi, langsung kita masuk ke sesi pertama yang akan dibawakan oleh Daniel Riley dari Renewable Thermal Collaborative Worldwide Fund dengan topik implementasi energi terbarukan dan energi efisiensi melalui clean heat dan solusi thermal di kawasan industri. Daniel, waktu dan tempat dipersilakan.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and good morning. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today, and it's been a real interesting to look at the agenda for the meeting and for the capacity building over the last 3 days, and it looks like you guys have covered a lot, and it's a really ambitious agenda. So I'm very proud to be part of it. Well, what I wanted to spend about the next 40 minutes on this morning was to kind of take a little step back from the industrial estates in Indonesia specifically, and look at an approach that we're working on in the US and elsewhere to trying to drive industrial decarbonization by using a multi-stakeholder or collaborative approach. There's a lot of different things that need to be done, technologies. There are technology barriers, policy, there are policy barriers, market barriers, there's barriers to the market, there's insufficient market-based instruments. There's a lack of understanding about what the need really is and what the heat profiles are across the different industrial sectors. So there's a lot that we don't know about. And I think about the electricity sector has been moving towards renewables, or it has been establishing those sort of market structures for decades globally. And in the industrial decarbonization effort, we need to accelerate that. We don't have all of those answers. We don't have all of those transaction types. We don't have mature technologies in some cases. And so in order to try to accelerate this and give us any shot at 1.5 degree future, we need a collaborative, what we call all hands on deck approach to getting going. And so it has to involve companies, it has to involve technology solution providers, it has to involve government at every level. But what we really wanted to do with the Renewable Thermal Collaborative is put the end users, so the scope 1 emitters, at the center of the discussion. It's ultimately them that will need to invest in the technology solutions and implement the technology and solutions. So we wanted to create a collaborative around those companies that we could help accelerate, bring together the right people and accelerate that work. So I'm going to share some of that experience with you here this morning. Oh, I'm going to slide. Oh, I haven't shared yet, have I? Nope. Let me share my screen. Share screen. Okay. How's that, Thania? Can you see that?
Yes, clearly, Daniel.
Perfect. Okay, well, again, my name is Daniel Riley. I work at WWF US in Washington, D.C. in our headquarters office there. I work with our country offices around the world for about the last 5 years. We've worked with many of the WWF offices on establishing renewable electricity corporate platforms in China, India. Our team in Vietnam works very closely with the Clean Energy Investment Accelerator there in a partner program called the Vietnam Clean Energy Leaders. And then more recently, I've started working a little bit more on the thermal energy challenge and on industrial decarbonization through the RTC, the Renewable Thermal Collaborative. So I'm sure you have gone through this, and even at a much more local level in the last few days, but the thermal challenge is really the hidden climate challenge. It hasn't gotten the attention, nor does it have the solutions that we have seen in the power sector. It does not have the attention or the solutions we've seen in the transport mobility sector. And yet it's a huge part of the challenge, as can be seen here, including industrial thermal energy and also buildings, heating and cooling for buildings. When we think of thermal energy in industry, these are some of the things that really stand out. The industrial sector is about 1/3 of all greenhouse gas emissions globally. And across 8 manufacturing sectors, that's about 77% of industrial emissions. Space and water heating, as we said a minute ago, constitute about 40% of total energy consumption in buildings. And yet the renewable thermal energy globally is growing at less than about 2% annually. And most of that is biomass, bioenergy, which is going to be a part of the solution, but may not ever reach that scale, that curve of increase that we're going to need to address the challenge. So when we think of renewable thermal energy, we're really talking about energy used for the process, water, and space heating and cooling, and that comes from a sustainable or a waste-derived source. So what are these technologies specifically? Well, for the RTC, we're focusing on this suite of technologies. Biomass, which is obviously going to be a key, or at least an initially a huge key to the solution set in Indonesia. Biogas, including direct landfill gas, geothermal, RNG or biomethane. We say beneficial electrification. Really, we're just talking about electrification, but we understand when we talk electrification, much like a transport You have to have the sister effort of greening the grid. So those things have to go in parallel. Green hydrogen or clean hydrogen, we can talk about that if that's of interest, and then solar thermal as well. And one of the other things we're looking at is thermal storage. Some of that is solar and some of it otherwise, but trapping that heat. And then there's things like heat pumps, combined heat and power, and some of the other technologies that are behind the meter that are going to be extremely important in the industrial sector. But these are sort of the suite of technologies that have been neglected that will really need to mature, bring the price down, and get to scale. So how are we thinking about doing this? What is the RTC? The Renewable Thermal Collaborative is it's a global coalition. The main effort at the moment is in the US. So companies, institutions, governments, and it's all members are committed to scaling up renewable heating and cooling at the facilities, and therefore cutting the carbon emissions. And I will say we have our main effort right now, based on some philanthropic funding, which is really supporting our work, is in the US, and it's in the industrial process emissions. But we are doing heating and cooling, and we are doing some work in Europe and looking to partner and expand globally. And as you'll see, because many of the companies who are central to our effort have their facilities and their emissions and their loads are actually all over the world. The RTC is actually based on a successful model that WWF and partners, including WRI, founded in the US some years ago, which was originally called the Renewable Energy Buyers Alliance. That effort has now spun off into an independent business association called the Clean Energy Buyers Association. And it's grown, it's up to like 300 companies in the US that are all transacting in the renewable electricity market. And so the main idea there was, again, twofold. One is that we need to put buyers at the center of the solution for renewables. They're going to be the users, these large energy buyers. They're the customers. So how do we develop a market that works for them, and that therefore can take advantage of their voluntary commitments and their willingness to transact in the market? So we have these companies, and I understand you guys will be talking about SBTI later. We have these companies, many who are taking these targets but can't fulfill their targets because the market structures don't work or the technology isn't available. So how do we put them at the center of a discussion to broaden that? And that's a similar approach that we've been asked by the companies to take around the thermal energy challenge, and that's where the RTC was born. We have two partners in this effort. We have DGA, which is a small kind of energy consulting firm that does technical work for us and serves as the secretariat. And then we have C2ES, the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions, which has one of its programs is called the BELC, and it's the Business Environment Leadership Circle, and it's industrial companies working towards the environment. So it was a great fit for WWF. That works through many of our climate programs with a lot of the leaders, and then also to bring in really the heavy emitters who ultimately are the folks who are going to have to make the change. So we're growing fast. We, I think at the beginning of last year, had about 10 members. We have about 25 now. You can see it's a range of companies from a variety of different sectors. We also have City of Cincinnati, City of Philadelphia, the University of California system. So there's some different institutions as well, and a lot of, obviously, the heating and cooling is going to be important for those. Kaiser Permanente is one of the largest hospital systems in the US, and then many of the other brands you probably recognize. So we call the companies again, those who have the scope 1 emissions, the users of the technology are our members, and then our sponsors are their technology solution providers. So we have a wide variety of either specific technology like Chirotherm, which is working on green hydrogen. We also have Edison Energy, NextEra Energy. These are companies that work on behalf of companies to engage in the market and advise on the market. We have MRETs, which is really interesting and will be very interesting. They're looking at how to develop a thermal REC, essentially, and create a REC market in the US for thermal energy, a renewable energy certificate market. Then we have utilities. We're obviously very engaged with RNG, with green hydrogen. What's the future of the infrastructure look like there for the delivery of these technologies. So it's a good mix, and we're happy to say we are growing weekly, adding new memberships. So there's finally a strong energy around this in the U.S., and we hope that the RTC, this collaborative, is starting to be a kind of a center of gravity for the discussions. So with that grant, which was again U.S. focused, we have one of our goals will be U.S. focused. One of our objectives is U.S. focused. As we expand, we'll have broader heating and cooling goals, broader global, or work with partners to develop country-specific goals. But in the U.S., what we have set on as the goal is to increase thermal energy deployment in the industrial sector by 150% by 2030. So that's to it. So we're at about 2.5 quads now total in the US. So this would put us at about 6 quadrillion BTUs of renewable thermal energy deployed in the US. That would be the equivalent of about a 30% decrease in industrial emissions by 2030 off of the baseline. And we feel like that's a decade. We have 3 decades to get to 2050. So we want to start attacking about a third of that in order to make sure we're on a pathway to net zero, to full decarbonization in the US industrial sector by 2050, by mid-century. So this is just a interesting way to show that we understand that this is about 2026 is about a 20% increase. So you can see this yellow line or orange line is what the United States Energy Information Agency was predicting in their scenario for the increase. That's mostly biomass, and it's not really going anywhere. In some of the scenarios, they're updating the scenarios as we are daily. But this is sort of when we undertook this. This is where it was, barely moving as a business as usual. So then we've taken a 20% increase off of 2020 by 2026. So sort of getting some technology deployed and starting to create the enabling environment, starting to really work on the policy environment so that we can have this real upswing as we get into the second half of the decade. So what we call our levers for change, the way we're going to go after this, the RTC, we have 4 levers for change. The first is vision. One, we found that, as I said, this effort towards decarbonizing thermal is new. There's no consensus about how to do it. It's very fragmented. So one of the things we wanted to do was to start to bring a clear consensus or a clearer vision about how we're going to get there and what roles can renewable thermal technologies play in achieving what we need to achieve, and how and by when. What we have underway right now is a study that will attempt to do that at a high level in the US. So it's a vision report to try to build that around. So getting everybody pulling in the same direction. Next is that we just need more people. It's a difficult challenge. We need more people engaged. We need more hear the voices of more stakeholders. We need to ensure that communities are involved, fence line communities for industrial areas. We need to make sure that the workers' voices are heard, and that diversity and equity and inclusion is a part of the transition, so that as we transition the whole industrial sector from carbon to non-carbon, that the benefits of that are felt equally across society. So obviously one of the biggest things there is to just grow the collaborative, more companies, more experts crowded in, more technology solution providers part of the discussion. Finally, action. Obviously, that's the big one. How do we get case studies going? How do we get pilot projects going? How do we get the market instruments deployed and built? How do we build the confidence of our members to actually make the investments they're going to need? And that's kind of where this vision comes from too. Why would I invest in solar thermal if it's all going to have to be green hydrogen? Well, we need to show them what the future looks like for some of these technologies and how they all will work together. Then policy. Can't do any of this without policy support. So tax policy, tax incentives for investment is a big part of these, leveling the playing field where there's fossil subsidies, ensuring that there's just transition policy, and ensuring that there's sufficient RD&D, There's one thing that's coming down in the US will be, rather than green hydrogen, there'll be a clean hydrogen standard. It's going to be hugely important. What that standard is set at. So we're deeply engaged at federal policy now, and we're looking to expand a little bit more into state policy, which in the US actually has a lot of power over some of the energy strategy in particular regions and states. So we kind of are trying to balance these four pillars or levers and go forward there. So what are the priorities this year as we're really trying to scale up and get moving? I kind of actually went through those a little bit. But for vision, we want to develop a vision for the role of renewable thermal energy in the industrial sector. So what's it going to be? How do these technologies fit in? Community, just to grow the RTC and increase the influence of members' voices. And that's the other thing when we think about policy. We have all of these companies, we have all these NGOs. How do we combine our voices into a much more effective advocates for the right policies? And even letting policymakers and other stakeholders become aware of the problem, which is that we don't have policy solutions for thermal decarbonization. Action, again, to catalyze the deployment of these technologies through education and training, connecting users to solution providers through the RTC, and then working to facilitate the pilot projects. And then the last thing here on action that I'll say is we see that RTC is ultimately a knowledge organization. So then it's capture the lessons learned, come back to education and repeat. And so we're constantly building confidence and knowledge. Policy, I mentioned tax incentives, RD&D, and then other enabling environment things like tradable market instruments will be very important, particularly for fuels. So one of the things for action, what we've been thinking about is technology action plans and partnerships and sector-based action plans and partnerships. So we have a lot of interest, obviously, from our technology providers to think about the technologies, to put the technology at the center of it. But then we also have companies who think about themselves in terms of their sector, and they measure themselves and their peers relative to their sector. And we're not sure exactly what's the most effective. So we're starting to look at driving technologies through these. Basically, this is a fancy way that we're calling working groups. And so, but we'll do, it's a partnership and a plan. So we'll have a strategy, and then the members will work together to drive that policy, to drive that plan. So what we want to avoid is this perfect solution written by an expert and put on a shelf. We want whatever they'll actually work on together and drive progress that way through these TAPs and then the SAPs. So we'll do a technology assessment. We've done some of those. You can find those on the website. We've done electrification. We've done solar thermal. We've done some work on RNG. It's basically unpack the technology and then why is it relevant for the company. Then develop the priorities based on that as background, as context. What do the companies want to do? How do they want to work together? And these three steps are really where the RTC would actually do something together, which is they'd start investing, they could do projects, they could make transactions, then we'd share those, we'd do the case studies, we'd present those at working group meetings, we'd learn from that. Obviously engage policymakers to make sure they understand the problem, the challenges, and then what some of the preferred solutions could be and what some of the experiences. And then figure out how we get a market instruments that can unlock investment for those technologies. And then again, generate and disseminate lessons learned. These are the working groups that we've launched so far. Some, like electrification, have many, and these are technologies. So you can see they track closely to the technologies we're working on. The green hydrogen we just launched in January. We have about 30 members so far and growing. And this is basically just getting everyone smart on all of the different challenges. What are the technology challenges? What are the infrastructure challenges? What are the applications in the industrial sector? All these different things. How will instruments work? How will the clean hydrogen standard? So all of these things we sort of are bringing in the experts. We have the companies, then the companies bring that back to their organizations. We have, so these are the sectors and then some of the other working groups. So right now we're getting ready to launch in food and beverage, not the most difficult. And that was sort of the idea. We think that there's a lot of medium to low heat action that can be taken with commercially available technologies in the US right now in the food and beverage sector. We've seen a lot of action, AB InBev, Diageo, other breweries that are starting to decarbonize their work. So we wanted to start there. Then we'll move to key ones in the US, manufacturing, chemicals, pulp and paper, metals, over the next few years. We also have a working group on greenhouse gas accounting standards, which is obviously essentially important for companies who need to measure, report, and get credit for the work they're doing. We have a collaborative projects working group, which is sort of doing a side project on combined heat and power in Europe right now, which is going well, and we hope to replicate that where we can do sort of group pilots. Then federal policy, which is our biggest working group, it has the most interest, and then we hope to start doing regional or state policy working groups. So there's a wide variety of activity sort of going on. And it's a bit risky for us. We have a small staff, not a ton of money. We're very much betting on that we are successful and that we can continue to grow and continue to crowd in space, create energy. But we need to offer a lot to ensure that there's a lot of people that can show up. And just one sort of piece that I wanted to just make sure that we communicate that we're very aware of in the RTC. One is that this challenge is still largely misunderstood. I think we're just starting to really understand the challenge we're solving for in many cases, and it's really poorly quantified. Certainly for policymakers, that's the case. But even many companies themselves are just now getting to grip on what exactly is their thermal energy challenge. And they're sort of learning the solution as they really identify the challenge for themselves. Behind the meter actions, just like in any industrial process, are really going to be a huge part of the solution. Really, in every case, maybe the biggest part of the solution paired with some of these technologies like efficiency or process change or equipment change and heat capture and heat pumps, and these different engineering solutions are going to be a big part of this as well. And most of the technologies are expensive now, but costs will be competitive this decade. That's the main premise, and we're seeing a lot of market-based analysis that's really starting to show that. We work closely with Bloomberg New Energy Finance to understand how they're modeling and what they're projecting for costs and under what scenarios those costs could be realized, and then begin to work those into the strategies for our working groups. And this is probably something that anybody who works with Clean Energy Investment Accelerator, with our WRI and WWF, hears all the time, but corporate commitments are what's driving the RTC, and corporate commitments are what has driven action in this sector to date, certainly in the US, and will be the continuity as policies change, as elections happen, getting the SPIs set, getting the public corporate commitments, having the target that they're working to. Every company in the RTC that will be investing in renewable thermal technologies and will be the leaders in this space have taken a target. That's why they're there. And so it's a key part of this as well. And it's those companies that will talk to and interact with the policymakers, that will give policymakers confidence that they're moving in the right direction and that they can provide the solutions that will actually work in the marketplace. And so I can't stress that enough. And happy to answer any questions or discuss any elements of the presentation. All right, and very much open to hearing suggestions as well. Oh, I didn't look in the chat. I can start that, I guess.
Oke. Terima kasih Daniel atas presentasinya yang tentu sangat membantu untuk para kawasan industri di sini untuk lebih memahami tentang renewable thermal kolaboratif. Bapak dan Ibu dan para hadirin yang saya hormati, selanjutnya kita akan masuk pada sesi tanya jawab yang pertama oleh karena adanya perbedaan waktu dari Daniel. Untuk itu saya undang Mas Reski Zain selaku Power Sector Analyst dari World Resources Institute dan CIA Indonesia sebagai moderator dari sesi diskusi ini. Mas Reski, waktu dan tempat saya persilakan.
Ya, terima kasih Tania untuk sebagai Master of Ceremony pada sesi kali ini. Perkenalkan, nama saya Reski Kairuna sebagai Power Sector Analyst dari WRI CIA Indonesia. Terima kasih Daniel untuk presentasinya. Saya pada kesempatan kali ini didaulat untuk menjadi moderator yang akan membantu keberjalanan dari diskusi kita pada pagi hari ini. Baiklah, saya juga akan berbicara dalam bahasa Indonesia dan akan menggunakan bahasa Inggris ketika bertanya kepada Daniel untuk mempercepat pemahaman pertanyaan yang disampaikan. Baiklah, thank you Daniel for the presentations. It's very interesting topic you have addressed. Before, I would like to ask you about questions. I hope these questions can trigger the discussion further. Can you emphasize and compare about thermal energy and also electricity consumption industrial sector, and how industrial estates can play a central role to help the tenants or the companies in adopting the renewable thermal energy? Thank you, Daniel. Please answer the questions.
Great. Yeah, I mean, I think it's really a matter of whether, so in the electricity sector, there has always been an issue for corporates around if they were tenants, and but it's the same thing whether you're a tenant or whether if you're a small, if you're a retail shop and you've got many distributed retail storefronts. It doesn't make any sense for you. You're not going to take direct control of direct electricity into each of those green electricity. So there was a way of developing market-based solutions so that you could sort of invest in new capacity for renewables and then sell that into the market and then just retain the environmental attribute certificate. One of the questions that I think is an open question is that are there fuels for which that will be an analogy? And you could think of biofuels, biogas rather, hydrogen, renewable natural gas. So as we talked about greening the grid, and a lot of the corporate investment went to greening the grid, and then they would retire environmental attribute certificates. Is there a similar effort where we're going to green the pipeline? And can corporate investment be channeled to green the pipeline? Then there's all the behind the meter stuff that we sort of talked about, where you're just going to have to bring those emissions down, and then what you can't bring down through new processes, through energy efficiency, through other things, through heat pumps, you're going to have to reduce. So maybe you have drop-in fuels that then you can just green the pipeline. It's unknown whether that's the way that this is going. And right now, in some of the discussions around the greenhouse gas protocol for land use and biogenic sources, that's not clear that that's the direction that it may be going. And so there's, I think, a lot more discussion that's going to come into that. So there was this idea that where you were didn't really matter so much. You were contributing to a greener grid through your investments. In some ways, we're not going to be able to do that with industrial. You're going to have to reduce the emissions where you are, and you're going to have to bring those technologies where you are. And I'm really interested to find the answer to the question, because I think that is the key question. And I think we looked a lot about, could a tenant or an industrial park, could they do the work to ensure that there was direct renewable electricity coming into that area? And then would that be an incentive for companies to relocate there? And we never really saw that. I think because the certificate market became such a popular mechanism. But I could see, particularly with green hydrogen, they're going to develop green hydrogen hubs, and there's going to be pipeline green hydrogen. It's going to be probably near a strong renewable source, near a strong industrial cluster, and that's going to compel companies to move there. And so I think as we think about, here's the thing that everyone has been telling us about green hydrogen and clean hydrogen, is the first question to ask is, what's the infrastructure plan? And so I think for the industrial parks, it's how do you connect into what is a future infrastructure plan, let's say for something like green hydrogen. They're going to put pipelines in the ground. They're going to put distribution centers in the ground, or they're going to put trucking networks, which probably won't work for corporates because you'll still be on the hook for all the emissions from the trucks. So you'll probably want something piped in. So how are they going to build that? And then do you have certain sectors that are really going to benefit from green hydrogen, and do they co-locate there? Do you start to connect in to that process by where you are or where you move to? I think these are some of the key questions. But to me, the big ones are: to what extent will we need to really have to be physically buy the green technology, or will there be a market instrument? And then two, for those where you are going to do that, how do we tap into the discussions around the infrastructure? Because those plans probably aren't developed. I mean, we don't know how we're going to do it yet. And it was kind of like, LNG in the same regard. Like if we could go back 10 years ago, an industrial estate needs to ensure that they have access to the terminals, access to the pipes, and then from there they have something that a competitor doesn't have, and that can be a draw for corporates or the suppliers of corporates with that have taken targets.
Okay, thank you Daniel for the answer. Jadi memang pentingnya market-based mechanism dalam hal ini dan juga investment untuk teknologi baru, teknologi green renewable thermal baru yang harus disiapkan oleh para industrial sector. Nah, selanjutnya ada pertanyaan dari Pak Nanto dari Adidas. Here's the questions. It is closely related with Indonesian conditions where biomass is becoming the top priority when they want to transition into greener thermal energy. Can you explain, Daniel, regarding to the hindrance in biomass usage, especially related to the projections growth in the graph? Because you mentioned before there's a graph. What happens with the biomass uptake there, especially in the US where you have a large agricultural industry? And also the next question would be what is the appetite in US consumers or manufacturers in this case of using the biomass? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of interest in biomass. There's a lot of hesitancy among the environmental community in the US around biomass, with the fear that it will be hard to regulate and will create perverse incentives for the creation of more industrial waste. Take, for example, we have really well-meaning rules in Europe around the use of woody biomass for the generation of electricity. And this is intended to reduce the reliance of fossil fuels. And what is driving that is a policy decision that says that any biomass can be considered carbon neutral. But in reality, what we know is that it's actually forests in the southeast United States that are being cut down, pelletized, and sent to Europe to create electricity. And for us, there will be uses for biomass, but they'll have to be offset by the potential negative consequences once you get to scale of ensuring that you're not, like, we want to use food waste. We want to use all the food waste. We don't want to create a market for new food waste. So I think there will be a role for biomass, certainly. I also think it's rather mature in the US. I think we don't need as much tax incentive, for example, to develop that. There's some hesitancy, and they're still kind of trying to figure it all out. What's in, what's out, and how do you actually define it in a way that will not, it's like when ethanol in the US first came online and created, huge markets for corn that went to the creation, or diverted huge markets of corn to the creation of a bioenergy rather than for food. and the market it took a long time to adjust in the prices in the world, effectively world food prices. And so I think there's a lot of caution to just ensure we get it right. It will be part of the solution, though, at least initially.
Ya, terima kasih Daniel. Mungkin ini diskusi biomass cukup menarik Pak untuk kita simak bersama. Mungkin Daniel bisa menekankan bagaimana di Amerika permasalahan mengenai feedstock biomass ini bisa diselesaikan secara kolaboratif antara government dan juga manufacturing sectors. Apakah ada standar tertentu yang disiapkan sehingga feedstock tertentu yang melebihi batas tersebut tidak dianggap sebagai green energy, atau bagaimana approach yang dilakukan oleh aktor-aktor yang ada di Amerika? Mungkin bisa dijelaskan sedikit, Daniel.
Looking at the chat.
Sorry, Daniel, do you hear the questions? I asked the question in Bahasa Indonesia to be easier to be understood by the participants.
No, I had turned off.
All right, okay, I will repeat the question. So the biomass things is very important, where Indonesia also we have our eyes on biomass and how to increase the uptake of biomass. But you are correct, we have the problems now regarding to biomass because we have to clear up the lands and then plant the energy crops or food crops to be used as a feedstock. In this case, what is the approach from US government, and also what is the collaborative approach from US government and also the sectors, industrial sectors, to handle these problems? Do you have standardized system where each specific crops is not included into the green energy? How do you approach this problem at the moment?
So we would be open to suggestions, to be honest. At the moment, we have a lot of different interests within the biomass space, all trying to compete with a narrative, with their story. And I think we've created some tools, and I can send you the I'll send you guys the tool. It's an online tool where basically you can get the greenhouse gas potential of different biogenic solutions. And this one's really interesting because you can put in all different feedstock, how, where it came from, what type of forest, what type of feedstock. And then you can plug it in, and then it tells you what the emissions would be. And then if you get a 50% increase over, virgin gas, that it would be the comparison in the US, then good choice versus not. But right now, all of those different competing interests are still fighting for who's right. And so what we've taken a step back, and we luckily at WWF and with partners, WRI and others, are trying to unpack all those questions. And what we're trying to do is figure out how do we provide a set of standards or some guidelines or a solution that is obvious and simple, but effective. And that's really hard because anybody who's worked on biomass or land use or forest from an emissions standpoint, but also a forest health standpoint, knows it gets extremely complicated very quickly. And we've got a list of 50 different land and forest and bio products, and they're okay in this circumstance, they're not okay. We're trying to figure out how do you make sense of all that, and take advantage of, because what you need to balance is beyond, as we all know, beyond just the emissions. First, you got to get the emissions right. I don't think, and then beyond that, we think there should be what's called a hierarchy of use. So if you don't want to use biomass for things that there's a perfectly good other solution that doesn't affect, the natural world. And so that's what we're trying to figure out. We don't have the solution yet. It'd be really interesting. Like there's a lot going on in Europe right now around that, and where they landed in the new renewable energy directive is really sort of a compromise. You can tell it's not the technocrats' language. You can tell that there's different interests there because it's a very compromised language if you've had a chance to look at it. And so that's kind of where we are in the United States. We're trying to figure out what the rules should be. The RTC, when we were providing inputs on tax credits for renewable thermal energy, and because we were unable to define exactly how we thought biomass should receive a credit, we just left it off for now. We don't want to do that. We want to have an opinion, and we want it to be based on science, but we haven't arrived at it yet. I probably said too much for a translated answer. Sorry about that.
Baik, terima kasih Daniel untuk penjelasannya. Memang mungkin ini masih work in progress. Daniel, Daniel, I will start speaking in bahasa Indonesia, so if you may activate the interpreting system. Memang untuk biomass ini merupakan hal yang sangat menarik dan untuk kita bahas berikutnya. Tapi mungkin saya akan segue sedikit untuk pertanyaan selanjutnya yang sudah di-collect. Saya mau berbicara mengenai teknologi dan sektor assessment yang menjadi salah satu tools atau steps yang dilakukan oleh RTC dalam membantu manufacturing sector dan juga government mendapatkan RTE deployment yang terbaik. Boleh tidak di-share mengenai key findings dari teknologi dan sektor assessment yang dilakukan di Amerika? Saya lihat ada reportnya dari RTC, dan bagaimana finding itu bisa replicable untuk diimplementasikan di Indonesia ataupun di Southeast Asia. Terima kasih, Daniel.
Great. So what we have done is technology assessments for a couple specific technologies: electrification, solar thermal, and we're about to release renewable natural gas in the US. These are fairly high level from a technology standpoint. They are showing what the application would be for the industrial sector and what the cost, technology, market, other market barriers are right now. We will be creating one for green hydrogen, and for we're doing another one for food, for the food and beverage sector as well. So that obviously that'll cut a little bit differently, but they're kind of a starting point. So the electrification one's actually really interesting. It's very, that one's particularly technical, and because it's so mature, you can do the analysis on that, and it goes through a bunch of different sectors and looks at the emission savings, the cost, and everything associated with that. We use that as basically as the starting point for the discussion with the companies about what's the action that comes next? What are the policies that will support that? Or what are the investments that you can make? Or what's the best timing to make the investment? Or, where does the price of natural gas need to be where you're operating in order for that investment to make sense? So things like that. But those are the ones we've done. There's a broader one that we're kind of in the process of talking to technical partners about, which is that vision report. That'll be a little bit high level, so it won't be as detailed, but it's supposed to create a picture of all of the different pieces together. And then one analogy may be, if you've seen the EIA's 2050 net zero roadmap. So that's the whole energy sector, and it has all different key milestones, and it shows the wedges coming down, and it's really nice visual, and you can kind of picture it. So this is something that would sort of give us that level of vision about how the industrial sector emissions would come down to 2050. When green hydrogen we think will be competitive, and in which sectors and which emissions that'll account for. In fact, can we get low heat from solar thermal in the next 10 years? That sort of big picture to just kind of create to put everyone going in the same direction. But we haven't we're just now talking to the technical partners for that. And I can share the link though to the other reports. I'll put that in the chat.
Ya, terima kasih Daniel. Mungkin bisa nanti di-share mengenai linknya di chat box. Masuk ke pertanyaan selanjutnya. Ini pertanyaan lanjutan dari Pak Nanto dari Adidas. Beliau bertanya mengenai terkadang company mencoba untuk menggantikan sumber dari industrial heat, fuel-nya atau teknologinya, tetapi jarang melihat opportunity yang lebih luas lagi mengenai untuk apakah fuel ini digunakan dan teknologi itu diganti untuk apa. Pertanyaannya adalah, apakah RTC juga expand community-nya atau ekosistemnya untuk juga memasukkan energy provider di ekosistem RTC?
So, and thank you for the question. If I understand, I mean, the short answer is yes. I think the community is anybody who's going to help. The starting point, I think, is that the companies with significant thermal load really need a lot of help to get to meet their commitment. They're going to need a variety of technologies. They're going to need a whole variety of behind the meter investments, efficiencies. Some of these sectors are going to fundamentally change the way they make the product that they're making to reduce the emissions. And so any and all are welcome to contribute to that, because we're going to need innovation from all sides.
Oke, baik. Terima kasih, Daniel. Mungkin pertanyaan tadi merupakan pertanyaan terakhir yang akan kita tanyakan di sesi kali ini. Terima kasih untuk Daniel untuk partisipasi dalam diskusi ini. Apabila memang ada tambahan knowledge product ataupun report dari RTC yang bisa dipahami dan bisa dibaca oleh partisipan di sini, mungkin Daniel bisa meletakkan tautannya di chat box yang ada di sini untuk menjadi bahan pertimbangan lah bagi partisipan yang ada di sini. Baik, terima kasih Daniel untuk sesi Q&A-nya. Saya Reski Kainugan mengembalikan sesinya kepada Tania. Terima kasih.
Baik, terima kasih Mas Reski dan Daniel atas diskusinya tadi, seru sekali mengenai renewable thermal kolaboratif. Selanjutnya kita akan masuk pada sesi yang kedua oleh Mas Nanda Nur dari World Resources Institute dengan topik pengenalan Science-Based Target Initiative untuk kawasan industri. Mas Nanda, waktu dan tempat kami persilakan.
Thank you, Tania. Hi again, everyone. Good morning. I hope you can see my video well. Nanda, saya manager for sustainable business and corporate engagement at DBRI Indonesia. Really appreciate the opportunity given. Tadi saya juga sempat join in the last 15-20 minutes untuk listen on the previous session between Reski and Daniel. Pretty insightful on the energy. Now I wanted to take this opportunity to improve further the discussion agar bisa bagaimana dari inisiatif energi tadi gitu kita kuatkan agar bisa mencapai level di mana ada climate targets yang bisa mendorong energi inisiatif tersebut hingga mencapai target-target iklim yang paling ambisius, terutama untuk bisnis-bisnis yang melakukan kegiatan di sekitaran industrial estates gitu. Dan ini kan pasti cukup spesifik inisiatifnya dan cara-caranya very spesifik menggunakan apa yang relevan terhadap industri tersebut saja lah, gitu bisa dibilang ya. Saya izin screen share, semoga lancar di sininya sebentar. Bentar. Oke, jadi kesempatan ini saya coba share sedikit tentang the concept and some examples dari benefit maupun past dan ongoing projects dari industrial estates trying to reach into net zero, gitu ya. Nah, what we know now adalah there are so many companies yang sudah done good enough climate progress dan targets gitu. Tapi dari traditional reduction target tersebut, kita tahu company bisa achieve ini, namun mengalami kesulitan untuk track ambition-nya dan menghadapi challenge kalau misalnya ada perusahaan banyak di dalam subsidiary dia, bagaimana nih mengcombine targetnya agar bisa menjadi target kesatuan yang lebih menyeluruh. Di satu sisi sama, kita melihat tren dan dinamika di luar, di mana ada transisi menuju low carbon economy yang underway gitu ya, dan accelerating hanya akan semakin lebih cepat gitu ke depannya. Setiap sektor yang akan terlibat ini pasti tertransformasi, baik itu kecil maupun besar, langsung tidak langsung gitu ya. Dan kita tahu leading business ini mengerti kalau mereka ini adalah sebuah peluang dan setiap bisnis bisa menjadi solusi terhadap peluang tersebut. Nah, pertanyaan saya adalah untuk setiap perusahaan atau industrial estates gitu yang sudah memiliki target iklimnya tadi, sebenarnya di skala apa dan di kecepatan apa sebenarnya dekarbonisasi itu bisa dilakukan gitu. Jadi apa yang ingin saya sampaikan tentang Science Based Targets Initiative ini adalah bagaimana untuk mengimprove saja gitu ya, menguatkan yang sudah dimiliki target-targetnya oleh perusahaan tersebut agar semakin science based, even more higher quality-nya gitu ya, dan juga boosting competitive advantage agar transisi menuju low carbon economy jadi tidak hanya untuk perusahaannya tapi juga untuk society yang lebih luas itu bisa dipercepat dan ditingkatkan kualitasnya gitu. Nah, untuk mencapai net zero gitu ya, company itu perlu melakukan perhitungan dulu, segala sesuatu perlu datanya, kuantitatif as much as possible gitu ya. Ada istilahnya scope 1, 2, 3. Nah, ini saya harap rekan-rekan di sini dimanapun berada sudah mungkin pernah mendengar sebelumnya tentang greenhouse gas protocol gitu. Ini adalah salah satu standar paling tinggi bisa dibilang gitu di level internasional untuk menghitung secara komprehensif dan juga men-tracking gitu ya atau memonitor setiap periodik waktu semua komponen dari sebuah aktivitas atau produk atau perusahaan yang punya nilai emisi gitu. Emisi sendiri adalah pada dasarnya segala bentuk sampah yang sifatnya gas buangan gitu ya, yang akhirnya akan berdampak kepada krisis iklim tadi. Nah, kita lihat di sini secara singkat saya bisa jelaskan skop 1, 2, dan 3 itu ada yang sifatnya langsung maupun tidak langsung. Jadi semakin kita menuju skop 3, maka prinsip utamanya adalah emisi tersebut makin berada di luar kontrol dan di luar proses atau rantai nilai atau value chain dari perusahaan tersebut gitu. Jadi semakin ketiga itu semakin sulit untuk kita manage gitu. Sebagai perusahaannya memanage itu semakin sulit gitu. Nah, jadi satu itu adalah semua yang berhubungan company facilities, company vehicles, dari gas buangannya, pembakaran energi segala macam. Kedua adalah untuk keperluan steam, heating, cooling, listrik di kantor, pabrik segala macam. Sedangkan yang ketiga adalah semua yang berhubungan dengan barang, jasa, pemakaiannya, distribusinya, transportasinya, waste dari produknya gitu ya, processing of sold products-nya dan segala macam gitu. Jadi ada yang mulai dari hulu sampai hilir itu perlu dihitung dengan challenge-nya masing-masing gitu ya, karena kita mengerti kalau yang di luar value chain mungkin akan sedikit sulit untuk dihitungnya gitu, karena perlu melibatkan supplier maupun vendor maupun user lainnya gitu ya tentang behavior mereka menggunakan materi tersebut gitu. Nah, tapi ini adalah comprehensive framework-nya yang perlu kita lihat bersama. Nah, dari situ muncullah prinsip net zero. Setelah dihitung, lalu diapakan untuk menjadikan ini sebagai net zero framework-nya. Ada 4 pada dasarnya prinsipnya, yaitu near term, 1, 2, jangka panjangnya, ketiga, mitigasi di luar value chain-nya, keempat adalah netralisasi dari emisi yang tersisa. gitu. Nah, jangkanya beda-beda, ada yang 5-10 tahun untuk near term, dan paling telat 2050 untuk yang long term. Nah, menuju ke sana, dari pengurangan emisi ini, lihat di grafiknya itu turun terus harapannya. Di sini poin utamanya adalah abatement atau pengurangan emisi dari perubahan bisnis proses maupun karakteristik produknya, itu merupakan prioritas nomor 1. Lalu prioritas nomor 2 adalah bagaimana emisi yang ada tersisa tadi itu di ujungnya by the time 2050 dicapai, misalnya tinggal tersisa 30% atau tinggal tersisa 10% saja terhadap baseline tadi, itu yang dinetralisasikan. Caranya gimana? Ada dengan cara misalnya menanam pohon atau kredit dan segala macam yang nanti saya akan jelaskan di slide-slide berikutnya. Nah, in the meantime gitu ya, apabila perubahan bisnis proses tadi mungkin sulit atau belum maksimal, kita juga bisa melakukan mitigasi yang sifatnya tidak mandatori, tapi tetap direkomendasikan untuk dilakukan gitu. Misalnya dengan RED plus credits atau melakukan direct air capture, use dan storage gitu. Yang sifatnya itu adalah mengkompensasikan. Nah, pada dasarnya the ideal science-based targets itu perlu menginkorporasi keempat-empatnya gitu. Tidak perlu at the same time, bisa bertahap gitu ya, tapi science-nya akan require high quality standards-nya hingga keempat komponen ini. Nah, sekarang kita lihat sebenarnya approach sederhananya gitu ya, terhadap pengurangan emisi itu seperti apa. Yang paling sering dipakai untuk metode modeling gitu ya, terhadap pengurangan emisi hingga 2050 tadi adalah yang ACA atau Absolute Contraction Approach. Ini adalah di mana company itu menargetkan absolut saja gitu. Pengurangan emisinya dari yang 100 tinggal 70, lalu tinggal 30, lalu tinggal 10 gitu misalnya pada saat tahun berapa, dan berapa gitu. Jadi as simple as that gitu ya. Nah, ini bisa dilakukan di semua industri kecuali power dan timber atau forestry. Nah, ada yang kedua nih. Jadi untuk yang physical intensity convergence adalah ketika perusahaan ini bersama di dalam sektor yang sama itu mengurangi emisi secara bersama-sama gitu terhadap target yang disepakati di dalam sektor tersebut gitu. Jadi semua company dalam tanda kutip ya bekerja sama gitu ya untuk mencapai target yang bersama itu. Nah, ini direkomendasikan karena khusus untuk heavy emitting sector seperti oil, gas, mining dan segala macam itu bisa masuk ke sini, atau untuk kategori komoditas yaitu seperti beef sampai wood fiber itu gitu. Nah, di sini ada sektor specific pathway. Pathway ini adalah sejenis guiding documents gitu ya untuk modelnya dan caranya menuju ke sana itu seperti apa gitu. Dan ini sudah available untuk saya ingin highlight di sini buildings gitu, karena saya rasa untuk industrial estate salah satu yang paling sering adalah untuk buildings-nya gitu ya, karena estate di dalam situ sendiri. Nanti kita juga punya slide specifically on that. The other approach untuk mengurangi emisinya tadi adalah dengan renewable electricity gitu. Misalnya purchase atau procure renewable electricity by 2025 sebanyak 80%, 1% di 2030. Mostly itu akan mengurangi scope 2 gitu, yaitu yang kita lihat di grafik tadi, pembelian electricity untuk kegiatan dan kantor gitu misalnya. Lalu yang dua yang terakhir adalah economic dan physical intensity. Ini di mana kita mematokkan, perusahaan itu mematokkan pengurangan intensitas emisinya itu, misalnya ton CO2 itu per unit of value added dari produksinya atau financialnya. Jadi per rupiah atau per dolar itu bisa dikurangi ton CO2-nya berapa, dan tetap tapi menuju ke 1,5 derajat Celcius. Ini apply biasanya untuk skop 3, yaitu yang tidak bisa dikontrol langsung gitu ya. Jadi misalnya sebuah perusahaan atau estate bekerja sama dengan semua supplier dia atau semua user dia gitu ya untuk mengurangi emisi berdasarkan economic intensity approach ini, karena lebih mudah gitu lah untuk men-set target tersebut karena terhadap unit of value added tadi. Nah, pada dasarnya 5 ini, dan detailnya banyak gitu ya ke dalam, dan saya rasa nggak cukup waktunya nanti kita deep dive, tapi intinya itu sudah ada modeling sistemnya gitu ya. Nanti saya juga tunjukkan sedikit toolnya. Nah, saya ingin bahas sedikit kalau yang 2 slide sebelumnya itu tentang abatement tadi, yang di framework tadi nomor 1 dan 2. Nah, kalau slide ini adalah untuk nomor 3 dan 4. Gitu. Jadi ada nature-based solution, saya ingin ambil contoh yang credits tadi dari misalnya penanaman pohon, cara-caranya adalah karena penanaman pohon ini ada risiko-risikonya gitu. Ketika sebuah perusahaan rely too much lah gitu mungkin ya, atau so much on nature-based solution agar mengurangi emisinya, jangan sampai nature-based solution tersebut mensubstitusi pengurangan emisi dari perubahan bisnis proses tadi gitu. Nah, jadi poinnya adalah ketika company itu yang controlling land dan bisa influence suppliers, masukkanlah NBS strategi ke dalam value chain dan monitoring system yang sifatnya bisa langsung enhancing land sector removal gitu. Nah, juga jangan lupa memasukkan strategi mitigasi untuk NBS investment dan hanya membeli misalnya high quality credits gitu. Dan kalaupun memasukkan kreditnya, masukkanlah kepada market yang memang highly credible gitu. Dan yang penting adalah align decarbonization strateginya dengan science-based targets tadi. Nah, terus jangan dulu gitu ya, tahan dulu untuk melakukan klaim terhadap climate neutrality atau net zero sampai poin terujung tadi di framework tadi dan idealnya di 2050 itu tercapai gitu. Baru di situ melakukan klaim gitu. Sebelum itu klaimnya adalah bahwa sedang progres menuju ke sana gitu. Nah, lalu sendinglah demand signal terhadap komitmen untuk jurisdictional base tadi, dan juga setiap company bisa participate untuk ongoing process to develop guidance dan norms tadi. Nah, ini status dari guidance dan pathway menuju net zero tadi untuk buildings, iron dan steel, cement, chemicals, dan segala macam. Saya highlight coba mungkin itu yang paling relevan, yang kotak merah itu untuk industrial estates, dan di situ ada guidance dan pathway yang sudah ada yang belum selesai gitu ya. Tapi general science-based targets tool di Excel-nya udah ada di sebelah kanan, itu readily available online untuk dipakai gitu ya. Dan method tadi kita lihat ada yang intensity maupun absolute, sudah ada caranya sendiri dan guidance bagaimana cara memakainya. Nah, disclaimer yang ingin saya sampaikan adalah khusus buildings, mungkin salah satu yang paling sering, itu belum ada guidance-nya sekarang. Adanya di Q4 2023, so masih 1,5 tahun dari sekarang gitu ya. Tapi pathway-nya sebenarnya udah ada gitu. Dan pathway ini sudah mulai bisa dipakai, tapi guidance-nya belum ada, jadi mungkin company membutuhkan lebih banyak waktu gitu untuk mempelajarinya, membuat guidance sendiri untuk bisa tetap memenuhi kriteria 1,5 derajat Celcius tadi, meskipun tanpa guiding documents-nya tadi. It is still possible jadinya begitu untuk setting target sebelum 2023 kuartal 4, tapi butuh effort lebih banyak saja gitu. Nah, ini contoh dari Rebanari Industrial Estate tadi, ada potensi untuk bisa menuju net zero. Nah, kalau kita lihat di sini, secara singkat mungkin saya bisa ceritakan kalau ada governmental policy, ada centralized energy utility, lalu ada plants yang lokasinya close dengan factory tadi, gitu ya, dengan each other. Nah, di sini ada net zero ecosystem itu membutuhkan satu capital investment support, lalu renewable energy sistemnya, smart control-nya, yang akan menuju kepada scope 2 reduction. Lalu untuk scope 1 dan scope 3-nya dibutuhkan perubahan di misalnya transportation distance-nya, dan juga leakage untuk piping untuk material distribution juga gitu ya. Nah, jadi ide utamanya untuk mencapai net zero adalah memerlukan perubahan tingkat emisi dari setiap perusahaan yang di dalam industrial estate tersebut gitu. Jadi tidak bisa hanya 1, 2 atau 80%, it has to be everyone yang included di sana gitu. Nah, ini adalah typical value chain-nya, di mana bundling antara proses mulai dari planning, manufacture, construction, sampai operation, semuanya perlu terlibat gitu. Mulai dari financing sampai production raw material, menggunakan usable produknya, lalu construction-nya, transportasinya, pre-occupation, hingga demolition atau rebuilding, itu juga perlu menjadi entire value chain yang dipertimbangkan dalam masuk ke untuk scope 1 dan 2 dan 3 tadi dari GHG emission source. Nah, kategorisasi ini penting agar kita bisa secara terstruktur gitu melihat komposisi emisinya dan nanti melakukan strategi untuk mengurangi each of them gitu. Saya ingin highlight di sini bahwa banyak komponen emisi yang akhirnya jadi keluar karena mungkin planningnya kurang maksimal gitu. Jadi menurut kita akan lebih mudah gitu untuk memanage emisi yang dikeluarkan apabila memang pengurangannya sudah direncanakan pada saat masih di planning stage gitu. Kalau sudah masuk ke manufacture, construction, atau operation stage, mengubahnya mungkin akan lebih sulit gitu loh, karena akan ada berarti investment yang sudah keburu keluar dan harus kita trace back, gitu. Harus kita mundur lagi dan akan memakan effort dan biaya yang lebih besar lagi gitu. Dan ternyata juga contohnya di industri atau sektor semen dan steelnya itu terlihat planning stage-nya akan berdampak besar gitu. Nah, di sini another key point yang ingin saya sampaikan adalah most influential actor itu adalah bagaimana tidak hanya si perusahaan yang menjalankan pengurangan emisi tersebut, tapi juga supporting actor, yaitu governments, international organization, financing banking, gitu ya, dan major market player yang tadi berkontribusi besar terhadap planning stage tadi, gitu. Nah, ketika operational levelnya itu nanti sudah dilakukan oleh si perusahaan tersebut, gitu. Nah, ini beberapa contoh dari ongoing projects SBTI yang ada di relevan dengan industrial estates gitu. Ini semua saya ambil contoh di Indonesia. Untuk embodied emissions atau emisi yang sifatnya ada di planning stage tadi. Ada dari Holcim replacing high GHG emitting raw material dengan program invented EcoPact tadi gitu ya. Jadi konkretnya lebih ramah lingkungan gitu untuk homes. Ada procurement policy. Nah, jadi ini nyambung ke poin planning tadi gitu ya. Ada certification dan labeling system untuk semua procurement programnya Kingspan. Holcim juga melakukan recovering of construction dan demolition dari waste tadi yang berarti managing scope 3 emisinya tadi gitu ya. Nah, sekarang kalau di operational emissions di US ini kebetulan contohnya architecture firm ini membuat sebuah proses untuk rethinking building design gitu. Jadi seperti operasionalnya diubah dengan optimizing akustik, sirkulasi dan lighting consideration agar efisiensi energi bisa lebih tercapai gitu. Lalu Landsec di UK, real estate company yang sudah committed ke SBTI juga mengurangi emisi 40% dengan cara meng-ensure lease areanya itu ada energy efficiency measurement dan ratingnya, mulai dari elektronik, heater, lamp, dan segala macam. Lastly, contohnya adalah WRI Indonesia sendiri untuk operational emissions-nya. Kita adalah selain key partner of dan founder of SBTI, kita juga periodically purchasing renewable energy certificates dari PLN. Nah, ini juga bisa mengconclude bahwa WRI sudah mulai moving towards cleaner part at least in its office electricity use-nya gitu ya. Nah, satu final example adalah CDL di Singapura karena berhasil melakukan di both operational dan planning stage emissions-nya tadi. Gitu. Ini result company yang sudah cukup komprehensif, mengurangi emisi dari segi demand-nya, balancing melalui renewables, dan juga compensating tadi gitu ya. Yang 1, 2, 3, 4 itu sudah tercapai nih, at least, belum tercapai, tapi sudah ada gitu, dan sudah validated emisi plan-nya atau reduce-nya tadi gitu ya. Nah, jadi ini salah satu example yang bisa dilihat cukup baik gitu untuk melakukan ini dan juga sudah menggunakan green ship yang di-develop Green Building Council Indonesia gitu sertifikasinya. Saya hanya punya a few more slides karena waktunya juga pas habis. Intinya ingin menguatkan kembali pesan saya tadi bahwa SBTI adalah pelengkap gitu ya, adalah penguat gitu dari apapun yang sudah perusahaan atau estate lakukan untuk bisa meningkatkan target iklimnya dan mencapai itu. Ini adalah proses standarnya, timeline-nya bisa mencapai paling lama gitu ya 24 bulan atau 2 tahun dari menghitung, mengkomit mendevelop targetnya, mensubmit ke sistem global, dan di sini kuncinya, karena yang membuat science-based targets berbeda adalah ketika dia divalidasi oleh ahli-ahli di tingkat internasional gitu, yang bisa secara saintifik mereview itu secara periodik gitu. Setelah 2 tahun dikomunikasikan ke publik, ke investor, ke user, ke government segala macam untuk komitmennya dan juga tracking per periodik waktunya gitu ya, per 6 bulan, per tahun gitu, dan direvisit setiap 5 tahun gitu untuk target-target yang tadi. Kita lihat contohnya yang sudah achieve globally adalah di mana company-company yang sudah set SBT itu mengurangi bahkan 25% emisi mereka dalam 5 tahun gitu. Padahal increase atau cost dari pencapaian SBT tersebut adalah hanya peningkatan 3,4% dari emisi dari energi dan industri tersebut. Dan satu fact lagi adalah ketika target untuk mencapai 1,5 derajat Celcius skenario tadi hanya butuh 4,2% pengurangan emisi scope 1 dan 2. Ternyata implementasinya mencapai 6,4 gitu. Jadi lebih tinggi dibandingkan target bahkan gitu. A very encouraging gitulah ya progresnya. Nah, ini slide terakhir dari saya adalah berarti set net zero target, business case-nya sepertinya cukup valid nih, cukup strong gitu. Pertanyaan saya adalah, will you take the lead gitu? Competitive advantage, innovation, investor confidence boosted, dan brand reputation boosted. Nah, can we then make the first action today gitu? Saya pause dulu di situ. Thank you atas waktunya. Very welcome untuk diskusi nanti bila ada pertanyaan konsep maupun teknis. Di sini juga saya ada 2 rekan lagi dari WRI yang bisa support bila ada kebutuhan teknis tersebut ya. Terima kasih. Saya balikan ke Tania.
Terima kasih banyak Mas Nanda atas presentasinya, sangat menarik sekali tadi tentang SBTI ya, sempat diilustrasikan juga salah satu contoh kawasan industri, yaitu tadi kawasan Rebana, gimana sih caranya untuk menuju net zero, lalu ada value chain juga dari bagaimana industri itu dapat merencanakan pengurangan emisi, mulai dari proses planning hingga sampai operation. Saya yakin sih pasti di sini Bapak dan Ibu semua sudah memiliki banyak pertanyaan ya untuk Mas Nanda. Boleh dituliskan saja di kolom chat atau nanti mungkin bisa raise hand pada saat Q&A. Oke, selanjutnya pada sesi terakhir kita akan tidak kalah menarik dibawakan oleh Hang Dao dari Clean Energy Investment Accelerator Vietnam dengan topik dekarbonisasi industri di Vietnam. Silakan Hang.
Thank you, Nathan. Nathania, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Can I start sharing my screen?
Sure.
Are you seeing my screen now?
Yes.
I can't see you, so if someone can tell me if you see my screen, so I can start.
Yes, we can see your
presentation.
It looks good.
Hello?
We can hear you clearly, actually.
I'm not hearing anyone.
Hello?
Not able to hear you. Sorry, let me check my connection.
Okay.
All right, but it doesn't seem like I can hear you now.
Can you hear me?
Okay, I restart to share my screen.
Okay.
So let me know if you can't hear me or see my screen. So good morning, everyone from Vietnam. Thank you, CAA Indonesian team for the invitation and for this opportunity to speak in this very exciting event with a lot of useful information for the companies. I'd like to contribute to this discussion about to discuss about the renewable energy procurement options and opportunities for industries, for companies, or in other words, focus on commercial and industrial sectors in Vietnam. And hopefully we'll bring you some of the interesting insights and case study that we're doing in Vietnam market. So my name is Hằng Đào. I co-lead the CEAA in Vietnam. So as I guess I can skip the introduction of what and who we are as CEAA, so that we can go straight to the content of the discussion today. So basically, we will go through the general context of the current Vietnam power market, and then I'm going to introduce and discuss some of the available opportunities and options for corporate to procure renewable energy in Vietnam. And also we will look at the key lesson learned and during the process that we support the companies in Vietnam in their renewable procurement through some of the case study and examples project that you're going to see in the later slides. So first of all, let's look at the overall context of the current Vietnam power market. As you might be aware of or heard of that, we are in the Vietnam market. We are in the unprecedented transition. That is, the power market is shifting gradually, slowly but gradually, from the monopolistic market to a more open, competitive wholesale and retail markets. And given the rising demand of energy consumption, especially from the industrial sectors that require more than double of the installed capacity by the next decades. And at the same time, we also witness a unprecedented renewable growth in Vietnam for the last 3 years, so to say. We're going to look at some of the figures about this RE growth in the next slides, but I just want to highlight that despite this impressive and booming of the RE, especially solar, the Vietnam power grid still dominant by coal-based or fossil fuel-based electricity. And one of the highlight that we should acknowledge about the current power market is that Vietnam's government have provided effective and attractive incentives for the market to boom in renewables. And despite all of that, in this context, we're talking specifically about the option for corporate or for company. Here we focus on commercial and industrial sector that we have still a few option or opportunities for corporate to procure RE. We're going to discuss in the more detail in the next slide, but I just want to highlight that we at the moment we have some options like rooftop solar for C&I sector, or we are expecting an upcoming pilot mechanism for direct power purchase agreement, and also we expect to have more clear regulation on REC for the RE certificate. So as I mentioned, let's look at together some of the impressive figures of the AI growth in Vietnam for the last 3 years. As you can see in this graph, starting from 2019, and Vietnam has a solar boom in 2020 and toward the end of 2021, and this growth that helps Vietnam is named in the global map of the, or global rank of the solar